woke up to silence today. The shepherd of the forgotten has gone home. In the early hours of a quiet morning, the Vatican bell rang, not in celebration, but in mourning. Pope Francis, the 266th leader of the Catholic Church, passed away peacefully at the age of 91. There were no grand farewells, only tears on the faces of the poor, the exiled, the voiceless. Those who once found hope in a man who chose humility over power. But who was he, really? How did a boy from the back streets of Buenos Aires rise to become the most radical pope in centuries? Tonight, we go back to the beginning. To understand not just the man, but the mission. This is not just a eulogy, it is a tribute, a story of faith, love, reform, and a legacy that may outlive the Vatican walls themselves. This is the story of Pope Francis. Long before the white robes and papal rings, there was a boy named Jorge. He was born on December 17, 1936, in the heart of Buenos Aires, Argentina, to Italian immigrant parents. His father, Mario, was a railway accountant. His mother, Regina, a homemaker with deep faith and strong hands. Jorge Mario Bergoglio grew up in a modest, bustling household, the eldest of 5 children. Their home smelled of fresh bread, boiled mate, and the hopes of a better life. He wasn't the strongest child. At 21, a serious lung infection nearly ended his life. One lung lobe was removed, a reminder, even then, that his breath was borrowed. But Jorge had something stronger than lungs. He had conviction. He was quiet, observant, devout, and unexpectedly charming. In his youth, he studied chemistry and held a job at a food laboratory. He danced tango, went to football matches, and even had a girlfriend until something inside him shifted. One ordinary day, he passed by a church and stepped inside. What happened next, he would describe as a moment that changed everything. He didn't hear voices, he simply felt called. At the age of 21, he entered the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, choosing not a life of fame, but of formation. And so began the quiet shaping of a soul, not one destined to rule, but to serve. The 1970s in Argentina were not years of peace. They were years of whispers, disappearances, and fear. Jorge, now Father Bergoglio, had been ordained in 969 and quickly became known for his sharp mind and deep discipline. He was appointed provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina at the age of just 36. It was a heavy mantle, because just as he began to lead, the country descended into what history would call La Guerra Sucia, the Dirty War. A military dictatorship swept across Argentina. Thousands of people vanished without a trace. Teachers, activists, priests. The church, too, stood at a crossroads. Some chose silence, some chose complicity. Bergoglio walked a razor-thin line. Some accused him of not speaking loud enough. Others later revealed he had quietly saved lives, hiding people, arranging escapes, protecting those in danger. He never defended himself with words. He let time speak. After the war, he reflected with pain, admitting he could have done more, acted sooner. But those who knew him said, he bore the guilt not as shame, but as a reminder to be better, always. It was in those shadows that his priesthood matured, not in peace, but in paradox. He learned that power corrupts easily, and silence can be deadly. From then on, he would speak not as a man of doctrine alone, but as a man of conscience. March 13th, 2013. Rain fell on St. Peter's Square as thousands of faithful huddled beneath umbrellas, eyes turned to the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. Then it happened. A puff of white smoke. Bells rang. Cheers erupted. Habemus Papam, we have a pope. But no one expected this man. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Unknown to most. Quiet, modest. A man who had refused to live in a palace, who cooked his own meals and took the bus to work. And now, the most powerful religious figure in the world. When he stepped onto the balcony, there was no grandeur in his voice. He didn't speak first. He bowed, and he asked the people to pray for him. Then came a name no pope had ever chosen before. Francis. In honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of the poor and of peace. That choice wasn't symbolic. It was a promise. Francis would become the first Latin American pope, the first Jesuit pope, and the first in centuries to not only lead the church, but to change its tone. From the very first day, Pope Francis made one thing clear. He was not a king. He rejected the golden throne. He chose to live in the modest guest house, Casa Santa Marta, instead of the grand apostolic palace. He wore simple white robes, old black shoes, and an iron cross, refusing gold and jewels. The shepherd must smell like the sheep, he once said, and he lived it. He visited prisons during Holy Week to wash the feet of inmates, Muslim, Christian, women, men. He embraced a man disfigured by disease on St. Peter's Square. He sneaked out at night in disguise to serve the homeless. He opened Vatican doors to Syrian refugees. He welcomed gay couples with compassion. He called for mercy for the divorced, the broken, the forgotten. Critics said he was shaking the foundations, but Francis wasn't tearing down the church. He was reminding it of its roots. In a world obsessed with wealth, he spoke of sobriety. In a culture of exclusion, he preached inclusion. He said, "The church is not a toll booth, it is a home for all." And in doing so, he became what the world hadn't seen in a long time. A pope who simply loved. Power has gravity. It pulls people inward toward privilege, silence, and self-preservation. But Pope Francis, from the start, walked the other way. As soon as he stepped into the shoes of St. Peter, he faced not only a church in crisis, but a Vatican buried under bureaucracy, scandals, and centuries of silence. The sexual abuse crisis still haunted the faithful. Financial corruption ran deep inside the Vatican Bank. The Curia, the church's powerful internal bureaucracy, was often seen as more political than pastoral. Francis didn't arrive with a sword. He arrived with a scalpel. He began to cut, not people, but practices. He merged Vatican offices, restructured finances, pushed for transparency. He created a new secretariat for the economy, inviting independent audits, and placed lay people, especially women, in leadership roles never before imagined in such halls. He removed bishops accused of abuse. He met with survivors. He apologized, not with formality, but with visible pain. And all the while, resistance grew. Within the marble corridors of the Vatican, not everyone was pleased. Some cardinals saw his humility as weakness. Others accused him of sowing confusion in doctrine. But Francis never shouted. He never excommunicated. He led by presence. He often said, "Reality is greater than ideas." And so, he focused not on winning debates, but on changing hearts. He walked with women and the poor. He called for the church to be more synodal, more listening, less commanding. In 2019, he convened the Amazon Synod, inviting indigenous voices to speak before cardinals in Rome. It was unprecedented, he said. We must not colonize spirituality. To some, it was threatening. To others, it was healing. But no one could deny it. In the Vatican of echoing marble and ancient rites, something was shifting. A pope, gentle in tone but firm in mission, was quietly rewriting the rules. In a world fractured by war, faith, and fear, he chose dialogue. Pope Francis saw no border too distant, no people too foreign. While others built walls, he crossed them. From the slums of Kenya to the mosques of Istanbul, from the refugee camps of Lesbos to the devastated plains of Iraq, he went. Not with armies, not with wealth, but with presence. In 2016, he visited the Greek island of Lesbos and brought 12 Muslim refugees back with him to Rome. No words, just action. In 2019, he did the unthinkable. He traveled to Abu Dhabi and signed the document on human fraternity alongside the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, marking the first time a pope had visited the Arabian Peninsula. "We are all brothers," he said, a phrase simple enough to offend extremists on both sides. The same year, he kissed the feet of South Sudanese leaders, begging them to keep peace. The image stunned the world. A pope on his knees before warlords. He was not naive. He knew peace is fragile, but he also knew the church should not sit in marble halls while the world bleeds. And so he traveled to Myanmar to apologize, to the Central African Republic, to pray under gunfire, to Iraq, where no pope had ever dared set foot. He walked among Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, atheists, and didn't ask what they believed first. He asked if they needed a hand. He didn't preach difference. He preached shared dignity. In a time of tribalism and online outrage, Francis spoke like a father, firm, compassionate, and unafraid to say, "We belong to each other." Not everyone sang his praises. For every embrace, there was a rejection. For every act of mercy, a voice cried, "Heresy." The opposition didn't come from outside the church. It came from within. Cardinals, bishops, theologians, some whispered in Latin, others shouted on television. They said he was confusing doctrine, that he opened the doors too wide, that he blurred the lines of tradition. When he said, "Who am I to judge?" they feared he was opening a floodgate. When he welcomed gay Catholics, invited divorced people back to the Eucharist, or questioned capitalism, he was accused of turning the church into a social project. Some conservative factions called for his resignation. Anonymous letters circulated. Former Vatican officials gave interviews laced with venom. And yet, Francis did not respond with fury. He answered with stillness. He once said, "I prefer a church that makes mistakes for trying than one that is sick from closing itself." He allowed criticism to come, and like water over stone, he let it pass, because his fight wasn't for popularity. His battle was for the soul of the church. He wasn't trying to erase tradition. He was reminding the world what that tradition once meant: compassion, justice, hope. And as the storms raged on, in social media, on pulpits, in boardrooms, Francis walked forward, not with armor, but with conviction. He did not die on a throne. He died in a simple room, beneath a wooden crucifix, surrounded by silence and prayer. Pope Francis passed away at the age of 91. There was no political scandal, no final controversy, only the quiet stillness of a man who had spent his life giving everything away. His funeral was not a spectacle. It was a vigil. The poor came. Refugees came. Bishops and beggars stood side by side. There were no velvet curtains, no royal pomp, only tears and whispered thanks. But what did he leave behind? Not monuments, not cathedrals in his name, but reforms that gave voice to the voiceless. Doors open that may never close again. A church that dared to listen. A Vatican that walked humbly. A generation that saw in a pope a father. He reminded the world that faith without love is noise, that doctrine without mercy is a cage. And perhaps his most powerful sermon was not something he ever said, but the life he lived. In the years to come, popes will rise and fall. But Francis, he will remain. In the name whispered in slums, in the tears of the imprisoned, in the silence of those who finally felt seen. He didn't build an empire. He built bridges, and those are harder to destroy. He never asked for applause. He only asked for prayer. And maybe that's the legacy that matters most. Not buildings, not titles, not doctrines carved in stone, but a world a little softer, a church a little braver, and hearts a little more open. Pope Francis reminded us that holiness is not perfection, but compassion. That true strength lies in kindness. And now, as the light fades on this story, we turn to you. What did you see in his journey? What will you carry forward? Maybe it's as simple as a bow instead of a shout, or a whisper that says, "You are not alone." Thank you for walking with us. If this story moved you, share it. Let others remember too. And as Francis would say, please do not forget to pray for me. Good night, and peace be with you.